The power died on a Tuesday afternoon in February, and I was the only person on Sycamore Ridge with a warm house. I'm Patrick Lawson, and I've been living in this 3-bedroom ranch in Summit County, Colorado, for about 5 years now. When I moved here from Denver, I knew exactly what I was getting into with the winters. My grandfather taught me about self-sufficiency before he passed, and one of his biggest lessons was never to rely on a single source of heat when you live in the mountains. That's why I installed a wood-burning stove in my living room 3 years ago, right after a particularly brutal winter knocked out power for 4 days. The stove was beautiful, a matte black cast iron beast with a glass door that let you watch the flames dance. I'd spent months researching models, comparing efficiency ratings and making sure everything was up to code. I hired a licensed contractor, got all the proper permits from the county, had inspections done, the whole 9 yards. Everything was legal and above board. For 2.5 years, nobody said a word about it. I'd use it on the coldest nights, keeping my electric bill manageable while staying cozy. My neighbors would sometimes comment on the pleasant smell of burning pine as they walked their dogs past my house. Everything was fine until last October when Patricia Morrison moved into the neighborhood. Patricia, who insisted everyone call her by her full name because nicknames were unprofessional, immediately got herself elected as the new HOA president. She was 53, had perfectly highlighted blonde hair that she wore in a perpetual bob, and drove a white Lexus SUV that she washed twice a week. Within 3 weeks of her election, I received my first letter. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper with the HOA logo embossed on the back. I opened it standing by my mailbox, and my stomach dropped as I read the first paragraph. Patricia was concerned about my wood stove. She claimed it was a visual blight that could be seen through my front window, that it posed an unreasonable fire hazard to neighboring properties, and that the smoke it produced was creating air quality issues for residents with respiratory sensitivities. The letter demanded I remove the stove within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. I checked the HOA covenants before installing the stove. There was nothing in there about wood-burning appliances. The covenants were written in 1987 and mostly covered external appearance standards, fence heights, and prohibited commercial activities. Indoor heating choices weren't mentioned anywhere. That evening, I called my neighbor Tom, who'd lived on Sycamore Ridge for 15 years. He was on the HOA board as the treasurer. "Tom, what's this about my wood stove?" I asked after the usual pleasantries. He sighed heavily. "Patrick, I tried to tell Patricia this was overreach, but she's got Barbara and Jennifer wrapped around her finger." They voted 3-2 to classify wood stoves as prohibited external fixtures. External. It's inside my house. Her argument is that the chimney pipe is visible from the street, making it an external modification requiring approval. That's insane. The chimney was installed with permits. The county approved it. I know, buddy, but Patricia's husband is a lawyer, and she's convinced she's got the legal standing. She's also telling everyone that your smoke is triggering her asthma. Does she even have asthma? Not that I've ever heard, and I've known her for all of 6 weeks. I thanked Tom and spent the next 2 hours digging through every page of the HOA documents. There was nothing. Nothing about wood stoves, nothing about fireplaces, nothing about any kind of heating appliance. The closest thing was a line about not storing firewood in front yards where it could be visible from the street, which I didn't do anyway. My wood pile was neatly stacked behind my house. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for November 3rd. I marked it on my calendar and started preparing. I printed out the relevant county codes, my permits, the inspection certificates, and highlighted sections of the HOA covenants showing there was no prohibition against my stove. I also pulled up property values for the neighborhood, which had actually increased by 4% since I'd installed the stove. Not that the two were related, but it showed the stove certainly hadn't hurt anything. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a renovated log cabin structure that the HOA used for gatherings. About 30 homeowners showed up, which was actually a decent turnout. Usually, these meetings drew maybe 10 people who had nothing better to do on a Thursday night. Patricia sat at the head table with the other board members: Barbara Chen, Jennifer Walsh, Tom, and Carl Rodriguez. Patricia wore a navy pantsuit and had a gavel, which seemed excessive for an HOA meeting, but she clearly enjoyed the authority. "We'll now open the floor for homeowner concerns," Patricia announced after rushing through the standard budget updates and maintenance reports. I raised my hand immediately. She looked at me with thinly veiled annoyance. "Yes, Patrick." I stood up, holding my folder of documents. "I received a letter demanding I remove my wood-burning stove. I'd like to understand the legal basis for this demand, since there's nothing in our covenants that prohibits it." Several neighbors turned to look at me with interest. Most people probably had no idea this was even an issue. Patricia cleared her throat. "The board has determined that your wood stove represents a modification to the external appearance of your home due to the visible chimney pipe. All external modifications require board approval, which you did not seek. The chimney was installed 3 years ago with proper county permits. If there was an issue, why am I only hearing about it now? Previous boards were clearly negligent in their duties," Patricia said sharply. "I'm correcting those oversights." Additionally, several residents have complained about smoke. "Who?" I asked. "I'd like to hear from these residents." Patricia's face reddened slightly. "Their complaints were submitted privately. That's convenient. I've received nothing but positive comments from my actual neighbors. The Hendersons next door even asked me for the contractor's information because they wanted to install one too." That caused a murmur in the crowd. Patricia banged her gavel, which made several people jump. "This isn't a debate, Patrick. The board has voted and the decision stands. You have 30 days to comply." "I'd like to see the meeting minutes from that vote," I said. "And I'd like to remind the board that HOA authority doesn't supersede county building codes. My stove is legal, permitted, and inspected." Tom spoke up then. "Patricia, I still think we should table this until we get a formal legal opinion. This could open us up to liability." "Your objection is noted, Tom, but the majority has ruled. Patrick, if you don't comply, we'll place a lien on your property for unpaid fines." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're threatening to put a lien on my house over a legal heating appliance." "I'm enforcing our community standards." Next item on the agenda. I left that meeting furious but determined. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Sarah Mitchell who specialized in HOA disputes. Her office was in Breckenridge, about 20 minutes from my house. Sarah was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. She reviewed my documents and the HOA letter while I sat across from her desk, trying not to bounce my leg nervously. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said finally. "They don't have standing. Your stove isn't an external modification in any meaningful sense. The chimney is part of the heating system infrastructure, which is explicitly outside HOA jurisdiction. They can't regulate your furnace, water heater, or wood stove. So what do I do? I'll draft a response letter explaining why you won't be complying and outlining the legal basis. We'll cite the relevant Colorado statutes. That will usually make these things go away because most HOA boards don't want to spend thousands in legal fees on a battle they'll lose. What if Patricia doesn't back down? Then we file a declaratory judgment action in district court and ask the judge to rule that the HOA's demand is invalid. But it won't get that far. Trust me, once her lawyer husband actually looks at this, he'll tell her to drop it. The letter went out a week later. I felt pretty confident things would blow over. I was wrong. December brought 3 feet of snow and another letter from Patricia. This one informed me that I was being fined $200 per day starting December 1st for non-compliance. She'd included a payment schedule and instructions for sending checks to the HOA's P.O. box. I forwarded the letter to Sarah immediately. She called me back within an hour. "Patrick, this is actually good news for us. They're creating a paper trail of overreach. Don't pay a cent. We're going to file that declaratory judgment action next week. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of your stove setup, get a statement from your contractor about the installation and permits, and keep using the stove normally." "Are you sure?" "They're threatening a lien. They have to take you to court to enforce a lien, which means a judge will look at the underlying fines. No judge in Colorado is going to uphold fines for a legally installed wood stove. Patricia is overplaying her hand badly." The lawsuit was filed on December 15th. I named the HOA as the defendant and asked the court to declare that my wood stove was not subject to HOA approval, that the fines were invalid, and that the HOA should be enjoined from further harassment. I also asked for attorney's fees. That got Patricia's attention. She showed up at my door 2 days later with Barbara Chen in tow, I assumed as a witness. I watched them approach through my front window, where my wood stove was radiating heat on a particularly cold afternoon. I answered the door but didn't invite them in. "Patrick, this lawsuit is unnecessary and hostile," Patricia began. "We can resolve this as neighbors. You mean I can rip out my legal heating system to satisfy your made-up rules?" "There's no need for that tone. I'm willing to compromise. If you agree to only use the stove when temperatures drop below 0, and you install a high-efficiency filter on the chimney to minimize smoke, we can waive the fines." "No," I said simply. Barbara looked uncomfortable. "Patrick, we're just trying to maintain property values." "By forcing me to remove a desirable feature from my home." "That doesn't track, Barbara. If anything, a wood stove is a selling point in Colorado mountain country." Patricia's face hardened. "You're being unreasonable. This lawsuit is going to cost the HOA thousands in legal fees that could go toward community improvements. Then drop the ridiculous demand and withdraw the fines. I'll drop the lawsuit immediately." "I can't do that. It would set a precedent that homeowners can ignore board decisions." "Homeowners should ignore invalid board decisions. That's not just my right, it's my responsibility. You're not a governing body, Patricia. You're a private organization with limited authority, and you're exceeding it." She left without another word, and Barbara scurried after her. Through my window, I watched them stand by Patricia's Lexus for 10 minutes, gesticulating and clearly arguing. Good. Maybe Barbara was finally questioning whether this was worth the fight. Christmas came and went. I used my wood stove every evening, keeping my house warm while my electric bill stayed reasonable. The lawsuit was slowly moving through the system, with a hearing scheduled for late February. Sarah was confident, and I tried to share her optimism. On January 23rd, I got home from work to find a notice taped to my door. The HOA had filed a counterclaim alleging that I was operating a nuisance that interfered with neighbors' quiet enjoyment of their property. They were asking the court to order the stove's removal, and to award them compensatory damages for the diminished air quality in the neighborhood. It was absurd, but it was also concerning. Sarah assured me it was an intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll settle just to avoid the hassle and expense of litigation. Don't blink. We're going to win this, and when we do, they're paying your legal bills. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for February 28th. That was when everything changed. February 26th started normally. I went to work at the engineering firm where I did project management, sat through boring meetings, ate a sad desk lunch, and drove home around 5:30. The temperature was dropping, with forecasts calling for a cold front that night. I stopped at my wood pile and loaded up an armful of split pine before heading inside. I had the stove going within 20 minutes, flames licking around the logs as heat began to radiate into the living room. I made dinner, streamed a movie, and went to bed around 11. The power went out at 2 in the morning. I woke up because my white noise machine went silent. The room was pitch black, no glow from the alarm clock or the streetlight that usually filtered through my curtains. I fumbled for my phone and checked the time. I also had a notification from the power company's app. Unplanned outage affecting 847 customers. Crews have been dispatched. Estimated restoration time, unknown. Unknown. That was never a good sign. I got up and checked the thermostat out of habit, but of course, the electric furnace wasn't working. The house was still warm from the wood stove, though. I'd loaded it before bed, and the coals were still glowing hot. I added 2 more logs and adjusted the damper to keep the fire burning steadily through the rest of the night. By morning, the power was still out. The temperature outside had dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills hitting negative 30. It was brutal even by Colorado standards. I checked the news on my phone and learned that a transformer station had suffered a catastrophic failure, possibly due to the extreme cold. Repairs could take several days because replacement parts had to be shipped from Nebraska. Several days without power in negative 15-degree weather. That was a life-threatening situation for a lot of people. My house, however, was toasty. The wood stove kept the living room at a comfortable 68 degrees, and while the bedrooms were cooler, they were still above 50. I was fine. I had a gas stove for cooking, plenty of food, and enough firewood stacked behind my house to last 2 weeks of continuous burning. Around 9 in the morning, I heard a knock at my door. It was my neighbor Mike Henderson from next door. He was bundled in a heavy coat, hat, and gloves, and his breath fogged in the air. "Patrick, sorry to bother you, but Linda and I were wondering if we could hang out here for a bit. Our house is already down to 48 degrees and it's still dropping. Of course, come on over. Bring anything you need. You're welcome to stay as long as the power's out." 20 minutes later, Mike and Linda were set up in my living room with blankets, books, and Linda's laptop, which she needed for work. They were effusively grateful, and Linda kept remarking on how nice the wood stove heat felt compared to their forced air furnace. "This is amazing," she said. "It's like camping but comfortable." By noon, word had apparently spread that my house was warm. 3 more neighbors showed up asking if they could warm up for a while. I said yes to all of them. My living room became an impromptu community center, with people rotating through to get warm, charge their phones, and make hot coffee using my gas stove. Around 2 in the afternoon, there was another knock. I opened the door to find Patricia Morrison standing there, and she looked miserable. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled. She wore a puffy coat that was zipped all the way up, and her nose was red from the cold. "Patrick," she said, and her voice was missing its usual imperious tone. "I need to ask you a favor." I waited. not making this easy for her. My house is very cold. The power company says it could be 3 days before power is restored. I was wondering if I could warm up here for a while. The petty part of me wanted to slam the door in her face. This was the woman who was trying to force me to remove the very thing that was keeping me safe right now. But I'm not that person, and leaving someone in the cold when I had the means to help wasn't something I could do. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I really appreciate this." She entered and immediately gravitated toward the stove. The living room was now full of neighbors, including Tom and his wife Rachel. Everyone looked at Patricia with varying degrees of amusement and satisfaction. The irony was not lost on anyone. Linda Henderson, bless her, decided to say what everyone was thinking. "Patricia, isn't this the wood stove you're trying to make Patrick remove?" Patricia's face flushed, and not from the heat. "That's an ongoing legal matter. An ongoing legal matter that's keeping all of us from freezing right now," Mike added. "Seems like maybe the HOA should be thanking Patrick instead of suing him." "The lawsuit is about community standards and safety," Patricia said stiffly. "This situation doesn't change the underlying issues." Tom laughed, an actual bark of laughter. "Patricia, you can't be serious. We're in a multi-day power outage in sub-zero temperatures, and the only warm house in the neighborhood is warm because of the thing you want banned. Do you not see the problem with your position? The HOA has rules for a reason." "The HOA has rules about lawn maintenance and fence colors," I interjected. "It doesn't have rules about heating systems, and it shouldn't. That's not within your authority, and this situation proves exactly why. What if you'd succeeded? What if I'd removed the stove last month? Where would everyone go right now?" Patricia didn't answer. She stood by the stove in silence, warming her hands. Over the next hour, more neighbors arrived. My house was now hosting about 15 people, all of whom had heard that Patrick's place was warm. I brought out every chair I owned, and people sat on the floor. Someone ordered pizza, but of course, the pizza place was closed due to no power. We ended up making a community meal with whatever people had brought from their fridges before the food spoiled. It felt good, actually. The community coming together, helping each other out, sharing food and stories. This was what a neighborhood should be, not rigid rules and petty enforcement. Barbara Chen arrived around 4 in the afternoon. She looked at the gathering and shook her head with a slight smile. "This is incredible, Patrick. Thank you for opening your home." "Of course. How's your place holding up?" "It's cold. We've been running the car in the garage to stay warm, but that's not sustainable and it's kind of dangerous. You should stay here. There's plenty of room." As evening approached, the temperature outside continued to plummet. The weather service had issued warnings about the extreme cold, advising people to stay indoors and check on vulnerable neighbors. My house had become a neighborhood warming shelter, and I was glad I could help. Around 6, someone knocked on the door urgently. I opened it to find Mrs. Yamamoto from 3 houses down. She was 78 and lived alone since her husband passed. "Patrick, I'm sorry to bother you, but my house is so cold, and I'm worried about my pipes freezing. The radio said to go to a warming shelter, but the nearest one is in Frisco, and I don't want to drive in this weather." "Mrs. Yamamoto, please come in. You can stay as long as you need. Have you had dinner?" "No, dear." I didn't want to open my refrigerator and let out what little cold air might preserve the food. Linda immediately went into mom mode, getting Mrs. Yamamoto set up near the stove with a blanket and making her a hot meal from our pooled resources. It struck me how naturally everyone was working together, all the usual neighborhood hierarchies and cliques forgotten in the face of a common problem. The evening wore on. Some people went home to sleep in their cold houses, layered in blankets. Others asked if they could stay overnight. I had 2 guest bedrooms and a finished basement, so I could accommodate several people. We set up sleeping arrangements, with Mrs. Yamamoto getting one of the guest rooms and a couple with a baby getting the other. Several others settled in the basement and living room with sleeping bags and blankets. Patricia left around 8, thanking me quietly as she headed back to her cold house. I almost invited her to stay, but she was gone before I could offer. The next morning, day 2 of the outage, my house looked like a campground. People were sleeping everywhere, and the wood stove had been burning all night. I'd gotten up twice to add logs, keeping the temperature comfortable. I made a huge pot of coffee on my gas stove, and people gradually woke up and congregated in the kitchen. "Any word on power?" someone asked. I checked my phone. Still showing unknown. The power company posted an update saying the transformer damage was extensive. They're working around the clock, but it's complicated by the cold weather. "Patrick, how much firewood do you have?" Tom asked. "Enough for at least another week of constant burning, maybe longer if we're strategic about it. I always keep a good supply." "That grandfather of yours taught you well," Tom said with approval. More neighbors showed up throughout the day. My house became the de facto community hub. People came to warm up, charge devices, share information, and just escape the cold for a while. Someone brought a portable radio, and we listened to news updates. The cold snap was affecting the entire region, and there were multiple power outages. Emergency shelters were overwhelmed on day 3, the power was still out. The outside temperature had warmed slightly to a balmy -5 degrees. My wood pile was noticeably diminished, but I still had plenty. The constant stream of neighbors had slowed somewhat as people adapted to their cold homes, layering clothing and consolidating in single rooms. Patricia showed up again that afternoon. She looked exhausted, her perfect appearance considerably worn. She warmed up by the stove for about an hour, then asked if she could speak with me privately. We went into my kitchen. "Patrick, I want to apologize," she began, and she looked like the words physically pained her. "This situation has made me realize that I was wrong about the wood stove. You were right. It's not just a personal heating choice, it's a safety issue. If you'd removed it like I demanded, people could have been seriously hurt over these last few days." I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't going to let her off that easy. "Patricia, it's not just about this specific situation. It's about the principle. The HOA doesn't have unlimited authority. You can't just decide you don't like something and make up rules to ban it. That's not how this works. I understand that now. I let my personal preferences override common sense and legal boundaries. If you're willing, I'd like to drop the counterclaim and recommend the board withdraw all fines and demands regarding the stove. I'd also like a formal acknowledgement from the HOA that wood stoves and similar heating systems are outside the scope of HOA regulation." She nodded. "I think that's fair. I'll bring it to the board. And Patricia, maybe consider that the HOA's role is to facilitate community, not control it. These last 3 days with everyone helping each other and sharing resources, this is what the HOA should encourage." "You're right," she said quietly. "I've been treating this like a job with power instead of a service to neighbors. That needs to change." The power came back on late that evening, day 3 of the outage. The lights flickered on around 8:30, and a cheer went up from the people still gathered in my living room. Furnaces kicked on throughout the neighborhood, and life began returning to normal. Over the next few days, people slowly stopped coming by, getting back to their regular routines. But something had shifted in the neighborhood. People waved more, stopped to chat, checked on each other. The crisis had reminded everyone that we were a community, not just houses on the same street. The board meeting on March 5th was nothing like the November meeting. The room was packed with homeowners, but the atmosphere was completely different. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the wood stove issue. The board has reviewed the matter of Patrick Lawson's wood-burning stove. After consulting with legal counsel and in light of recent events, the board acknowledges that heating systems are outside HOA jurisdiction. All fines against Mr. Lawson are hereby rescinded, and we will be filing paperwork to dismiss our counterclaim in the pending lawsuit. There was applause from the assembled homeowners. Patricia looked genuinely humbled. Additionally, the board will be drafting an addendum to our covenants explicitly stating that personal heating choices, including but not limited to wood stoves, pellet stoves, and similar systems, are not subject to HOA approval provided they meet county building codes and are properly permitted. More applause. Tom was grinning from his spot at the board table. Finally, I want to personally thank Patrick for opening his home during the power outage and for his patience with this matter. His willingness to help neighbors, even those who hadn't been particularly neighborly to him, exemplifies what community should be. Thank you, Patrick. I nodded in acknowledgement. It felt good to be vindicated, but more than that, it felt good to see the neighborhood coming together. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me again. Mrs. Yamamoto gave me a tin of homemade cookies. The Hendersons asked for my contractor's information because they definitely wanted a wood stove now. Even Barbara and Jennifer apologized for supporting Patricia's overreach. We just kind of went along with it because Patricia seemed so certain, Barbara admitted. We didn't think it through. That won't happen again. The lawsuit was formally dismissed 2 weeks later. Sarah submitted a motion for attorney's fees, which the HOA agreed to pay without contest. The total came to just over $3,000, which the HOA paid from their general fund. It was an expensive lesson for them, but hopefully, one that would stick. Patricia remained as HOA president, but she was noticeably different. She still organized community events and enforced reasonable rules about lawn maintenance and such, but she'd lost the authoritarian edge. She asked for input before making decisions and seemed genuinely interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. In April, the HOA organized a neighborhood cleanup day, and Patricia personally thanked everyone who participated. In May, they held a community barbecue, and Patricia showed up with homemade potato salad and actually socialized rather than supervising. People started to warm up to her, appreciating that she'd learned from her mistakes. Tom told me later that Patricia had been going through a difficult time when she'd moved to the neighborhood. Her marriage was struggling. She'd just left a high-stress job, and she'd thrown herself into the HOA role as a way to feel in control of something. The power outage and its aftermath had given her perspective. She and her husband had apparently entered marriage counseling, and she'd started volunteering at a community center in Frisco. People aren't just one thing, Tom philosophized over beers on his deck one evening. Patricia's not just a power-hungry HOA president. She's a person who was struggling and handled it badly, but she owned her mistakes and changed. That's more than a lot of people do. He was right, and I was glad Patricia had turned things around. Still, I kept detailed documentation of everything that had happened, just in case. Trust, but verify, as they say. The wood stove continued to be the heart of my home. I used it through the rest of that winter and into the next, enjoying the warmth and the independence it provided. More neighbors installed stoves of their own, and there was something satisfying about seeing chimney smoke rising from multiple houses on cold evenings. The following winter was milder, but we did have another power outage in January that lasted about 12 hours. Once again, my house became a warming center, but this time it was organized and expected. The neighborhood now had a phone tree for emergencies, and several homes were designated as warming locations because they had wood stoves or generators. Patricia was the one who'd organized the phone tree and emergency plan. She'd become genuinely good at her role once she'd stopped trying to control every detail and started facilitating community resilience instead. The HOA even allocated budget money to help subsidize generator purchases for elderly or disabled residents who might need extra help during outages. That spring, I was sitting on my front porch when Patricia walked by with her husband, David. They were holding hands and seemed happy. She waved. "Beautiful evening, Patrick." "Sure is. How are things going?" "Really well. David and I are planning a trip to Hawaii next month, first vacation we've taken in 5 years. "That sounds great. You've earned it," she smiled. "We all have. Thanks again for everything last year. You taught me a lot, even if I was too stubborn to see it at first." They continued their walk, and I sat there thinking about how much had changed in a little over a year. A neighborhood that had been on the brink of real division had come together, stronger and more resilient. An HOA president who'd been drunk on petty power had become a genuine community leader. And my wood stove, the thing that started it all, had proven its worth in the most dramatic way possible. My grandfather would have gotten a kick out of the whole thing. He'd always said that self-sufficiency wasn't just about taking care of yourself. It was about being able to take care of others when they needed it. The wood stove wasn't just about keeping me warm. It had been about having the capacity to help my neighbors when the grid failed. That summer, the HOA organized a preparedness fair, teaching people about emergency supplies, backup heating options, and community response plans. I gave a presentation about wood stoves, covering everything from selection to installation to proper use. It was well attended, and several more neighbors installed stoves that fall. By the next winter, Sycamore Ridge had transformed from a typical suburban neighborhood with a controlling HOA into a resilient community that actually looked out for each other. The covenants were amended to protect homeowner rights regarding heating systems and other safety equipment. The board became more transparent and collaborative. Neighborhood events were better attended and more enjoyable. And whenever I walked through the neighborhood on a cold evening, seeing smoke rising from multiple chimneys, I felt a deep satisfaction. Not because I'd won some petty battle with the HOA, but because the community was better prepared, more connected, and more resilient. The wood stove incident became neighborhood legend, the story that people told to newcomers to explain the culture of the place. It was the time the HOA learned its limits, the time the neighborhood came together, the time one person's preparedness saved everyone. Mrs. Yamamoto still brought me cookies every Christmas, always with a note thanking me for helping her during the outage. The Hendersons hosted an annual winter solstice party where everyone who had a wood stove was encouraged to bring a log to share, a symbol of community warmth. These little traditions grew from that 3-day crisis, constant reminders of what we'd learned. 3 years after the power outage, I got a job offer in Montana. It was a great opportunity, career advancement that was hard to turn down. I accepted, which meant selling my house on Sycamore Ridge. The house sold in 2 days, multiple offers, all above asking price. The winning buyers, a young couple with a new baby, told me the wood stove was one of the main selling points. They'd been looking specifically for a house with backup heating after living through several power outages in their previous apartment. "We heard about what happened here a few years ago," the husband said during the final walkthrough. How your stove helped the whole neighborhood. That's the kind of place we want to raise our daughter. I left Summit County with mixed feelings. I'd loved my time there, loved the mountains and the community I'd been part of, but I was taking the lessons with me. The importance of self-sufficiency, the power of community, the need to stand up against overreach while still being compassionate to those who make mistakes. Patricia threw me a going-away party, which was surreal given our history. The whole neighborhood showed up. People gave speeches about the wood stove incident, laughing about it now that time had passed. Tom presented me with a photo book documenting my time in the neighborhood, including pictures from those cold days when my living room had been full of neighbors. "You changed this place," Patricia said during her speech, "not just by standing up for what was right, but by showing us what community really means. We're better because you were here." It was generous and I appreciated it, but really, the neighborhood had changed itself. I'd just been the catalyst. My new place in Montana is a cabin on 5 acres with a view of the Absaroka Range. It has a beautiful soapstone wood stove that heats the entire main floor. I keep 3 cords of wood stacked and covered, always prepared. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away, so there's no HOA to worry about. But sometimes I miss the neighborhood dynamics, even the difficult parts. There was something meaningful about fighting that battle, proving a point, and then watching a community grow from the experience. You don't get that when you live isolated on 5 acres. I keep in touch with Tom and a few other neighbors from Sycamore Ridge. They send updates about neighborhood events and HOA meetings, which are apparently peaceful these days. Patricia served another term as president before stepping down to spend more time on her volunteer work. The new president is Carl Rodriguez, who runs the HOA with the same collaborative approach Patricia had learned. Last winter, Summit County had another major power outage. Tom sent me a message. "Power's been out for 2 days. 10 houses have wood stoves now. Nobody's suffering. The whole neighborhood is rotating through warm houses, sharing meals, and actually having fun with it. Your legacy lives on." That message made me smile. The wood stove had never really been about the stove itself. It had been about independence, preparation, community, and the proper role of governance in people's lives. Those principles had taken root in Sycamore Ridge and would hopefully continue to grow. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I just complied with Patricia's original demand. If I'd removed the stove to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. The neighborhood would have been fine most of the time, but when that crisis hit, when the power went out and temperatures plummeted, people would have suffered. Mrs. Yamamoto might have had a medical emergency from the cold. The couple with the baby would have been desperate. The neighborhood would have learned that compliance and keeping the peace mattered more than being prepared for worst-case scenarios. Instead, they learned the opposite. They learned that sometimes you have to stand up to overreach, even when it's uncomfortable. They learned that individual preparedness benefits the whole community. They learned that rules should serve people, not the other way around. These are lessons that go far beyond wood stoves and HOAs. They're lessons about freedom, responsibility, and the balance between individual rights and community standards. They're lessons that shape that neighborhood and continue to shape how I approach life in my Montana cabin. I still burn wood every cold night, watching the flames through the glass door, feeling the heat radiate out. It's practical and efficient, but it's also symbolic. A reminder of where I've been, what I've learned, and the stand I took when it mattered. The HOA tried to ban my wood stove, and in the end, they were the ones shivering in their homes while mine stayed warm. But more importantly, they learned from it. They grew from it. And that's the best possible outcome of any conflict. not just winning but everyone becoming better in the process.